What happens when one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat, only to face a barrage of disrespectful questions and personal attacks that cross every line imaginable? It only took 34 seconds for Denise Welch to destroy any chance of a civil conversation and turn a simple interview into one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. Brian Cox walked onto the set that morning expecting a typical promotional appearance. He was there to talk about his latest project, to share some stories, to connect with the audience. The legendary actor, known for his powerful performances and no-nonsense attitude, settled into his seat with a warm smile. He greeted the panel, shook hands, and prepared for what he assumed would be a pleasant conversation. But from the very first question, something felt off. Denise Welch leaned forward with a look that was less welcoming and more predatory. The other panelists seemed to sense it too, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as she began to speak. "So, Brian," Denise started, her voice dripping with an edge that caught everyone off guard. "You've had quite the career, haven't you? Playing all these powerful men, these authority figures. Tell me, do you think that's because you have some kind of complex about power in your real life?" The studio went quiet. Brian's smile faltered for just a moment. It was such a strange way to open an interview, so unnecessarily confrontational. But he's a professional, and he handled it with grace. "Well, I think as actors, we're drawn to complex characters," Brian replied calmly. "I don't think it has anything to do with personal complexes. I just love the craft of acting." You could see him trying to steer things back to normal, to redirect the conversation to his work. But Denise wasn't interested in normal. She cut him off before he could continue. Right, but let's be honest," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You've built your entire career on playing men who bully people, who intimidate people. Doesn't that say something about who you are as a person?" The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The other panelists looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable. One of them tried to jump in, to change the subject, but Denise shot her a look that said to stay quiet. This was her show, and she was going to run it however she wanted. Brian took a deep breath. You could see him processing what was happening, trying to understand why this host was coming at him with such hostility. He remained composed, his voice steady. "I think you're confusing the characters I play with who I am," he said. "That's the whole point of acting. I'm not those characters. I'm just telling their stories." "Are you, though?" Denise challenged, leaning back in her chair with her arms crossed. "Because from what I've heard, you can be quite difficult to work with. People say you're demanding, that you have a temper. Sounds pretty similar to these characters you claim you're nothing like." It was a cheap shot, based on nothing but gossip and rumor. Brian's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. This is a man who has worked in the industry for decades, who has earned the respect of his peers through talent and professionalism. And here he was, being attacked by someone who seemed to think the rules of basic decency didn't apply to her. "I have high standards for my work," Brian said carefully. "I'm passionate about what I do, but I've never been disrespectful to anyone I've worked with. If you've heard otherwise, I'd be interested to know your sources." The challenge was polite but firm. He was giving her a chance to back down, to admit she was out of line. But Denise Welch doesn't back down. She doubles down. "Oh, I have plenty of sources," she said with a smirk. "But let's talk about something else. Let's talk about your age. You're what, 70? Something now? Don't you think it's time to step aside and let younger actors have the spotlight? Isn't it a bit selfish to keep taking these big roles when you've already had your moment?" The ageism was blatant and shocking. The audience gasped audibly. One of the other panelists actually said, "Denise, come on!" But she ignored it completely. Brian stared at her for a long moment. You could see the anger building behind his eyes, but also the discipline of a man who has spent a lifetime controlling his emotions for his craft. "I work because I love what I do," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled. "And I work because people want to hire me. I'm not taking anything from anyone. There's room for all of us." "Is there, though?" Denise pressed. "Because I see a lot of talented young actors struggling to get opportunities while you and your generation hold on to everything. Maybe it's time for some self-awareness." This was beyond unprofessional. This was personal, vindictive, and completely uncalled for. Brian Cox had done nothing to deserve this treatment. He had shown up as a guest, with kindness and openness, and he was being treated like a criminal on trial. "I'm sorry," Brian said, his voice still controlled but with steel underneath. "But I'm not going to sit here and be lectured about my career by someone who clearly has some kind of agenda. I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked." "Attacked?" Denise laughed, and it was a cruel sound. "Oh, please. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you're not as tough as those characters you play. Maybe you're just a fragile old man who can't deal with reality." That was it. That was the moment everything changed. The insult was so over the top, so disrespectful, that even the audience started to murmur disapprovingly. The other panelists looked mortified, but Denise seemed to be enjoying herself, like she was feeding off the discomfort she was creating. Brian stood up, not dramatically, not with a big gesture, but simply and calmly. He removed his microphone with steady hands. "I've been in this business for over 50 years, he said quietly, but his voice carried through the entire studio. "I've sat through thousands of interviews. I've been asked difficult questions, challenging questions, questions that made me think. But I've never, in all that time, been spoken to with such disrespect and such obvious malice. I don't know what I did to upset you, Denise, but I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag." Denise's smile faded. For the first time, she seemed to realize that maybe she had gone too far, but instead of apologizing, instead of backing down, she doubled down one more time. "Oh, so you're just going to run away?" she said, her voice rising. "Typical. Can't handle a strong woman asking you real questions, so you throw a tantrum and leave. Very mature, Brian. Very professional." The audience was completely silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Brian looked at her with something like pity in his eyes. "A strong woman asks tough questions," he said. "A bully attacks people for no reason. There's a difference, and you should learn it." He turned to the other panelists and gave them a polite nod. "Ladies, it was lovely to meet you. I'm sorry we didn't get to have a proper conversation." Then he looked back at Denise one last time. "As for you, I hope whatever's making you so angry gets resolved. Because this isn't about me, this is about something going on with you." And with that, he walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Denise's face as she realized what had just happened. The other panelists sat in stunned silence. One of them finally spoke up. "Well, that was completely out of order, Denise. He was our guest." But Denise wasn't listening. She was staring at the spot where Brian had been sitting, and for just a moment, you could see the mask slip. She knew she had messed up. She knew she had let her ego and her need for control turn what should have been a pleasant interview into a disaster. The production team scrambled to cut to a commercial break. In the background, you could hear people rushing around, trying to figure out what to do. This wasn't supposed to happen. Guests don't just walk off the show, but Brian Cox had, and he had every right to. What makes this whole situation even more remarkable is how Brian handled it. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He didn't match Denise's energy with his own anger. He simply stood up for himself with dignity and grace, and he left. That takes more strength than any outburst ever could. From the moment Denise opened her mouth with that first aggressive question, you could see where this was heading. Every question was designed to provoke, to belittle, to make Brian defensive. She asked about power complexes, about his supposed difficulty on set, about his age, about taking opportunities from younger actors. None of it was relevant to why he was there. None of it was appropriate for a daytime talk show interview. And when he tried to answer respectfully, when he tried to redirect the conversation, she just kept pushing. She kept finding new ways to insult him, new angles to attack him from. It was like watching someone deliberately try to destroy a guest for no reason other than their own entertainment. The worst part was the way she tried to frame his departure as weakness, calling him fragile, suggesting he couldn't handle tough questions, accusing him of running away. But everyone watching knew the truth. Brian Cox wasn't running from tough questions. He was walking away from abuse. There's a massive difference. Tough questions are things like, your new project explores some dark themes. What drew you to this story? Or, you've spoken before about the challenges of the industry. How have you seen things change over your career? Those are questions that challenge an interview subject to think, to reveal something interesting, to go deeper. What Denise did was just attack him personally, question his character, insult his age, and suggest he was stealing opportunities from others. Those aren't tough questions. Those are just mean-spirited accusations dressed up as journalism. The other panelists clearly knew it too. You could see them getting more and more uncomfortable as the interview went on. They tried to intervene a few times, tried to steer things in a different direction, but Denise shut them down every time. This was her show, her segment, and she was going to do whatever she wanted, regardless of how inappropriate it was. When Brian called her out for being a bully rather than a strong woman asking real questions, you could see it hit home. Because he was right. Strength isn't about tearing people down. Strength isn't about using your platform to attack someone who came on your show in good faith. Real strength is about asking questions that illuminate, that educate, that entertain. Real strength is about creating a space where guests feel comfortable opening up and sharing their stories. Denise created the opposite environment. She created a hostile space where the guest felt attacked from the first second. And when he finally had enough and left, she tried to paint herself as the victim, as if she was the one being wronged. The irony is that Brian Cox has probably forgotten more about handling difficult situations than Denise will ever know. This is a man who has worked with some of the most demanding directors in the world, who has taken on some of the most challenging roles in theater and film, who has navigated an incredibly competitive industry for over 5 decades. He doesn't need to prove his toughness to anyone, least of all to a talk show host having a power trip. Throughout the entire encounter, Brian maintained his dignity. Even when she insulted him, even when she questioned his character, even when she suggested he was past his prime, he stayed calm. He answered her questions thoughtfully at first, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Only when it became absolutely clear that she had no interest in a real conversation did he stand up and leave. And the way he left was perfect. No dramatic storming off, no shouting match, no petty insults thrown back at her. Just a simple, clear statement about why her behavior was unacceptable, followed by a gracious goodbye to the other panelists and a final observation about what might really be motivating Denise's hostility. That last comment, about hoping whatever was making her angry got resolved, was particularly cutting because it was delivered with genuine concern rather than sarcasm. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to point out that her behavior suggested deeper issues that had nothing to do with him, and he was probably right. People don't act the way Denise acted in that interview unless something else is going on. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she had some personal issue with Brian that he wasn't aware of. Maybe she was trying to create a viral moment and thought being controversial would get attention. Whatever the reason, it backfired spectacularly. The audience didn't side with her. The other panelists didn't support her. And Brian Cox, the man she was trying to embarrass and diminish, walked away looking like the absolute professional he is. She wanted to make him look bad, and instead, she made herself look terrible. What's particularly frustrating about this whole situation is that Brian Cox is actually a fascinating interview subject. He has incredible stories from his decades in the industry. He's worked with legendary directors and actors. He's played some of the most memorable characters in recent television and film. He has insights about the craft of acting that would be genuinely interesting to hear. But instead of tapping into any of that, instead of having a conversation that would have been entertaining and educational for the audience, Denise chose to use her platform to attack him. She wasted an opportunity to create something valuable because she was more interested in creating conflict. And for what? What did she gain from this? A reputation for being difficult? For being disrespectful to guests? For not knowing where the line is between provocative and inappropriate? None of those things are positives for someone in her position. The saddest part is that this could have been a great interview. Brian was clearly willing to engage. He showed up, he sat down, he was ready to talk. All Denise had to do was treat him with basic respect and ask him actual questions about his work and his life. But she couldn't do that. She had to make it about power, about control, about putting him in his place for reasons that no one else could understand. When Brian stood up and removed his microphone, there was this moment where everyone held their breath. The cameras captured it perfectly. You could see Denise's expression shift from smug to uncertain. You could see the other panelists exchange glances. You could feel the energy in the room change completely. This was a guest walking off a live show. This was unprecedented. And it was happening because the host had pushed and pushed and pushed until she broke the unspoken contract between interviewer and guest. That contract is simple. Treat each other with respect, even when asking difficult questions. Denise violated that contract repeatedly, and Brian decided he didn't have to honor his side of it anymore. His statement, as he left, was measured and powerful. He acknowledged his long career, his experience with interviews, and made it clear that this wasn't about him being unable to handle tough questions. This was about him refusing to tolerate disrespect. There's a huge difference, and he articulated it perfectly. The comment about Denise needing to learn the difference between a strong woman asking real questions and a bully attacking people for no reason was particularly sharp. because it cut to the heart of what was really happening. Denise seemed to think that being aggressive and confrontational made her strong. But real strength doesn't require tearing others down. Real strength comes from confidence, from skill, from the ability to ask questions that challenge people to think without attacking their character. Denise failed that test completely. Every question she asked was designed to hurt rather than illuminate. Every follow-up was meant to put Brian on the defensive rather than explore interesting territory. She wasn't interested in his answers. She was interested in making him uncomfortable, in asserting her dominance, in showing that she was in control. But control is an illusion in situations like this. Yes, she was the host. Yes, it was her show. But Brian had all the real power because he had the ability to simply refuse to participate, and that's exactly what he did. He took his power back by standing up and walking away. The production staff scrambled to cut to commercial after he left, showed just how unprepared everyone was for this outcome, because it shouldn't have happened. Guests don't walk off shows when they're treated well. They only walk off when the situation becomes intolerable. And Denise made it intolerable. Looking at the whole exchange from start to finish, it's striking how quickly it went wrong. That first question about power complexes set the tone immediately. It was accusatory, it was personal, and it had nothing to do with why Brian was there. A normal opening question would have been something like, "Welcome, Brian. Tell us about your new project." Simple, straightforward, friendly. Instead, Denise came out swinging, and she never stopped. She followed the power complex question with accusations about him being difficult on set. Then she pivoted to ageism, suggesting he should retire and make room for younger actors. Each question was worse than the last, each one more inappropriate and more disrespectful. And through it all, Brian tried to maintain civility. He answered thoughtfully. He tried to correct her misunderstandings. He pushed back gently when she made unfair accusations. But there's only so much anyone can take, and Denise kept pushing past every reasonable boundary. The moment when she called him a fragile old man who couldn't deal with reality was probably the final straw. It was such a cruel, unnecessary thing to say. It wasn't clever. It wasn't insightful. It was just mean. And it showed that Denise had completely lost sight of what her job was supposed to be. Hosts are supposed to facilitate interesting conversations. They're supposed to make their guests feel comfortable enough to open up and share stories that the audience will enjoy. They're supposed to find the balance between asking challenging questions and maintaining a respectful environment. Denise did none of those things. Brian's final words to her, about hoping whatever was making her angry got resolved, were delivered with a kindness that she absolutely did not deserve. After everything she had said to him, after all the disrespect and hostility, he still had the grace to suggest that her behavior might be coming from a place of pain rather than malice. That's the mark of a truly good person. And then he thanked the other panelists, apologized to them for not getting to have a proper conversation, and walked away with his head held high. No storming off, no slamming doors, no final cutting remark to match her cruelty. Just dignity and grace under pressure. The silence that followed his departure spoke volumes. Nobody knew what to say. The other panelists looked at Denise like she had just burned down the studio. The audience sat in, stunned, quiet, and Denise herself seemed to finally realize that she had made a massive mistake. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. Brian Cox was gone, and he wasn't coming back. The interview was over, destroyed by a host who thought being aggressive and disrespectful made her edgy and interesting when it really just made her look unprofessional and mean. This whole situation serves as a reminder that power comes with responsibility. Denise had the power of being the host, of asking the questions, of controlling the flow of conversation. But she abused that power. She used it to attack rather than to enlighten. She used it to tear down rather than to build up. And in the end, it backfired completely. Brian Cox didn't need to sit there and take it. He's too accomplished, too respected, too secure in himself to put up with that kind of treatment. So he left, and in leaving, he made a statement about dignity, about self-respect, and about knowing when to walk away from a toxic situation. The interview that could have been a pleasant conversation about a legendary actor's career instead became a masterclass in how not to conduct yourself as a host. Denise Welch turned what should have been an easy, enjoyable segment into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television, and it was entirely her fault. Every choice she made was wrong. Every question she asked was inappropriate. Every follow-up was more hostile than the last. She had an incredible guest sitting right in front of her, willing to engage, and she drove him away through sheer disrespect. And Brian Cox, through it all, showed exactly why he's been successful for so many decades. He handled an impossible situation with grace, with clarity, and with strength. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't sink to her level. He simply stood up for himself and left, proving that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's toxic game.